Thank you so much for all you do. It simply wouldn't work without you, and thank you for going on to inspire so many young people. To all the supporters here today, thank you.
We were all distracted by royal gossip, but we missed the ultimate threat. Prince Edward, the family's most secretive member, just dropped a terrifying warning about the year 2027, and Buckingham Palace is panicking.
It's been a bit of a shock. However much one tries to prepare oneself for something like this, it's still a dreadful shock, and we're still trying to come to terms with that, and it's very, very sad.
What does the quietest royal know that King Charles is desperately trying to hide? To understand why this specific year is so significant, it helps to examine how the structure of the family has changed. King Charles has long favored the idea of a streamlined monarchy, meaning a smaller core group of senior royals representing the crown. The goal was to create a modern, cost-effective institution that aligned with public expectations. However, this model was designed under the assumption that the core group would remain fully active. Recent unexpected health challenges within the family, combined with the permanent departure of several senior members from public duties, have created a severe staffing shortage. By the time 2027 arrives, the gap between the number of national responsibilities and the number of people available to fulfill them will reach its narrowest margin in modern history. This is where the quiet observations of Prince Edward become highly relevant. While he rarely gives extensive interviews or participates in media campaigns, he has spoken candidly about the unique pressures faced by those who find themselves in the public eye. In past discussions regarding family members who struggled with the intense demands of the role, he noted that the spotlight thrown upon the family is brutal, and crucially added that everyone copes differently. This statement was widely reported by British media outlets, including Sky News and The Independent, as a rare moment of direct insight from a man who has watched the internal machinery of the palace operate for over 60 years. Edward's assessment is entirely fact-based rather than emotional. He has pointed out that while some people choose to step away from the glare of the cameras, others make the choice to invite more media attention in. According to his perspective, these are entirely different paths, and the institution itself cannot easily bend to accommodate personal preferences without risking its core function. His words serve as an operational warning about the realities of royal life. The pressure is not a temporary hurdle, it is a permanent condition of the job. As the staffing numbers shrink toward 2027, the intensity of that spotlight will inevitably increase for the few individuals who remain on the roster. The math behind the upcoming year is simple but problematic. The monarchy currently supports hundreds of charities, military patronages, and diplomatic relationships across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Traditionally, these responsibilities were divided among a large network of cousins, aunts, and uncles. Today, that network has largely vanished from official duty. Prince Andrew is permanently retired from public life, and other veteran royals are reaching an age where scaling back is a necessity. This leaves a massive burden on a very small group, primarily consisting of the King and Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and Prince Edward and his wife, Sophie. Observers within the British press have noted that by 2027, the workload will either have to be drastically cut, or the remaining working royals will face an unprecedented level of professional exhaustion. Edward and Sophie have already had to step up significantly, taking on complex international tours and high-profile events that would have previously been handled by other family members. The warning implied in Edward's perspective is that the current pace is unsustainable if the institution continues to shrink. You cannot maintain a global presence with a skeleton crew without something eventually breaking down. Furthermore, this situation creates a structural dilemma for the future. The next generation of royals, namely the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales, are still young and will not be ready to take on full-time public duties for many years. This leaves a significant time gap, with 2027 marking the entry into a decade where the institution will be at its most vulnerable. There are no backup members waiting in the wings to relieve the pressure. If any remaining senior royal is sidelined by illness or chooses to reduce their schedule, the entire operational framework of the Crown faces a genuine crisis of representation. Edward's approach to surviving this environment has always been to maintain a clear boundary between public duty and personal privacy. This philosophy explains why he and his wife have occasionally used humor and a complete refusal to engage with media narratives to protect their space. In a well-documented exchange following a highly publicized television interview involving other members of the family, Edward and Sophie simply joked about not knowing who the interviewer was, signaling their total detachment from the media ecosystem. They understand that to survive the upcoming years, a working royal must focus entirely on the work itself and ignore the noise surrounding it. When we look deeply at the logistics of the British crown, we see that the traditional model was based on visibility and presence. The late Queen Elizabeth famously said that she had to be seen to be believed. For nearly a century, that meant a vast calendar of regional visits, plaque unveilings, and community gatherings designed to bring the throne closer to ordinary citizens. In towns and cities across the country, a royal visit was a historic milestone that bound communities to the state. However, maintaining this massive presence requires a human infrastructure that no longer exists in the same capacity. The structural transformation that will hit its full peak in 2027 is essentially a supply and demand problem, where the demand for royal representation remains high, but the supply of available family members has dropped significantly. This structural shift has been analyzed extensively by contemporary royal commentators. Writing for publications like The Spectator, journalists have pointed out that the idea of a slimmed-down monarchy, while initially popular with the public for economic reasons, has left the family dangerously overextended. The problem is that while you can reduce the number of people carrying titles, you cannot easily reduce the public expectation for their presence without making the institution seem distant and irrelevant. If the royal family stops visiting schools, hospitals, and charities because they lack the personnel to cover the schedule, the core purpose of a constitutional monarchy begins to erode. Prince Edward has experienced this tension firsthand throughout his entire career. As the youngest child of Queen Elizabeth, he was far enough down the line of succession to explore opportunities outside the rigid framework of official duty, yet close enough to the center of power to understand its absolute demands. His early ventures into the media and entertainment industries showed an individual attempting to forge an independent path. However, when those private ventures proved incompatible with the strict demands of public life, he quietly and completely pivoted back into institutional service. This personal history means that when he talks about the realities of the job, he speaks as someone who has actively tested the boundaries of the royal machine and knows exactly where it breaks. This context gives added weight to his views on the next few years. The institutional framework is approaching a multi-year gap, where the senior working members will naturally face age-related limitations, while the younger generation is strictly being kept out of public life to ensure they have a normal upbringing. This intentional choice by Prince William and Princess Catherine means that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis will not be step-in solutions for the workload anytime soon. Therefore, the period surrounding 2027 represents a high-pressure zone where the remaining few must shoulder a disproportionate amount of responsibility. The danger of this model is not just physical exhaustion, but also a phenomenon known as overexposure. When an entire national institution relies on just a handful of faces to represent it at every major cultural, political, and charitable event, the public can grow overly familiar with those individuals, which dilutes the traditional mystique of the crown. Conversely, if those individuals must cut their schedules to protect their health and well-being, the monarchy risks fading into the background of British public life. Striking a balance between being visible enough to justify its institutional place and private enough to preserve its dignity is the primary operational challenge of the modern era. Edward and Sophie have managed to strike this balance better than almost anyone else in modern royal history. By avoiding personal public relations campaigns and focusing strictly on long-term patronages like the Duke of Edinburgh's Award and various educational initiatives, they have built a reputation based entirely on utility rather than celebrity. This focus on practical service is precisely what the institution will require to navigate the transition toward 2027. It requires individuals who are willing to do the heavy lifting of regional engagements, without demanding the center stage of global media attention. Ultimately, the issue facing the monarchy as it approaches 2027 is not a sensational scandal or a dramatic conflict. It is a practical problem of human resources. The warning derived from Edward's decades of quiet service is that the institution must adapt to a much harsher reality. The glamorous, expansive monarchy of the 20th century is gone, and the streamlined version that replaced it is running out of personnel. When a historically quiet person highlights the brutality of the spotlight and the fact that the institution does not bend easily, it is a realistic assessment of the future. The challenge of 2027 will be managing an empire of duties with only a handful of leaders left to carry the weight. When trying to understand why a quiet warning about the future carries so much weight, you have to look at the life of the person making that statement. Prince Edward has long been seen as the most low profile of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip's children, someone who seemingly accepted a background role in the family without complaint. However, looking closely at his early life and career choices reveals a very different story. He is actually a man who tried, quite visibly and at immense personal cost, to break out of the rigid constraints of the royal machine. He knows exactly what it is like to feel suffocated by institutional expectations, because he spent his 20s and 30s actively rebelling against them. When he observes that the public spotlight is brutal and that the institution does not bend easily for individuals, he is not speaking as a theorist. He is speaking from deep personal experience and a history of personal setbacks that the public has largely forgotten. His first major rebellion against the traditional royal mold occurred in January 1987, and it sent shockwaves through the British establishment. After graduating from Cambridge University, where his tuition had been sponsored by the Royal Marines, on the explicit understanding that he would serve afterward, Edward entered the grueling commando training course at Lympstone Barracks in Devon. For a family steeped in military tradition, this was the standard, expected path. His father, Prince Philip, was the Captain General of the Royal Marines, and his older brothers had already established their military credentials. Yet, just 4 months into the 12-month officer training program, the 22-year-old prince decided he had seen enough. He withdrew from the course, concluding that a lifelong career in the armed forces was simply not what he wanted. The media coverage at the time was intense and largely unforgiving. Newspapers ran front-page headlines speculating about his motives, and the public conversation frequently questioned his stamina. To counter the narrative that he simply could not handle the physical demands, his commanding officers took the unusual step of defending him publicly. Colonel Ian Moore told reporters at the camp gates that Edward had the physical ability to complete the training well and was highly respected by his instructors, emphasizing that he was leaving for very honorable reasons. Nevertheless, the institutional displeasure was real. Biographers like Tina Brown have noted that Queen Elizabeth was icily displeased by the decision, viewing the sudden departure as a dereliction of duty. Interestingly, it was Prince Philip who proved to be the most understanding, reportedly supporting his son's choice because he believed Edward should never have been pressured to join the Marines in the first place. This departure meant more than just a change of clothes. It carried financial and social consequences. Because he broke his contract with the military, Edward had to refund thousands of pounds that the Marines had advanced him for his university education. More importantly, it marked the exact moment he decided to step out of the royal comfort zone and test the waters of the real world. Having rejected the traditional military route, he chose to pursue a career in the performing arts and entertainment, a field that was considered highly unconventional for a son of the monarch. His transition into the professional entertainment world began through a connection with the legendary theatrical composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. Edward had previously commissioned a short musical from Lloyd Webber for his mother's 60th birthday, and this collaboration led to a job offer at the Really Useful Theater Company. Instead of demanding a high-level executive position, the prince started at the bottom, working as a production assistant. For several years, he was a regular fixture behind the scenes in London's West End, contributing to massive theatrical hits like The Phantom of the Opera, Starlight Express, and Cats. He loaded equipment, organized paperwork, and lived a life that was as close to ordinary as a member of the royal family could manage. However, the desire to prove that he could succeed on his own terms eventually led him to television production, a move that would result in some of the most difficult public scrutiny of his life. In 1993, he formed his own independent company called Ardent Productions. His goal was to create high-quality documentaries and dramas, focusing heavily on history and the heritage of the monarchy. On paper, it was an ambitious attempt to build a self-sustaining commercial business that did not rely entirely on taxpayer funding. In reality, the venture struggled to find its footing within a highly competitive and cynical media landscape. The British press and television industry treated Ardent Productions with a mix of hostility and amusement. Industry insiders frequently criticized the company, with some columnists calling it a sad joke and questioning its professionalism. The documentaries Edward produced, such as a well-received project about his great-uncle Edward VIII, found a reasonable audience in the United States and sold well internationally. But the company's financial reality was grim. Ardent reported financial losses in almost every single year of its operation, managing to break even only when Edward voluntarily chose not to draw a salary. The venture demonstrated a harsh reality that Edward had to learn the hard way. The public and the media would always view his professional efforts through the lens of his royal status, making true commercial independence virtually impossible. The experiment came to a sudden and controversial end in September 2001, highlighting the exact institutional boundary lines that Edward would later warn others about. An ardent television film crew was accused of invading the privacy of Prince William while he was a student at the University of St. Andrews. This occurred during a period when the British media had explicitly agreed to a strict privacy code to allow the young prince to study without harassment. The incident caused significant anger within the family, particularly with his older brother Charles. Recognizing that his dual role as a commercial producer and a senior royal was creating an impossible conflict of interest, Edward made a definitive choice. In March 2002, he announced he was stepping down from Ardent Productions permanently to focus on full-time public duties in support of his mother during her Golden Jubilee year. The company was eventually dissolved, leaving behind a clear lesson about the unyielding nature of the royal apparatus. This extended period of trial, error, and public criticism is crucial for understanding the man Edward became. Unlike his siblings, who largely stayed within the traditional boundaries of royal service, military appointments, and geographic dukedoms, Edward spent 15 years trying to build an alternative life. He felt the sting of public failure, the frustration of being judged by standard commercial metrics while locked inside a royal cage, and the realization that the media ecosystem will always prioritize conflict and curiosity over a royal individual's personal aspirations. When Edward returned to full-time duties in 2002, he did so with a completely altered perspective. He had learned that the institution does not bend to the desires of the individual, no matter how hard they fight for autonomy. You either play by the rules of the house, or the house eventually forces you back into line. This background explains why he has so little patience for modern public relations battles, or complaints about the hardships of public life. He has already traveled that road, made his mistakes, faced the headlines, and chosen to accept the reality of his role. This long history of personal rebellion and eventual conformity gives him a unique authority within the palace walls. He is the one sibling who genuinely understands the temptation to walk away because he actually did it. He knows the precise psychological cost of realizing that your identity is entirely owned by an institution, and he knows the quiet humiliation of having your personal ambitions picked apart by the public. Therefore, when he looks at the structural pressures building up toward the future, his perspective is uniquely grounded. He knows that the institution can survive a member walking away, and it can survive a member failing, but it cannot survive if those who remain refuse to accept the reality of the spotlight. His early life was a lesson in the boundaries of royal freedom, and it is a lesson that makes his quiet approach to the challenges of the modern era incredibly relevant. While individual resilience and a history of overcoming personal setbacks are essential components of survival, no working royal operates entirely alone. The ability to endure the pressures of the modern monarchy requires a dependable support system, a foundation that keeps an individual grounded when the public glare becomes overwhelming. For Prince Edward, that essential foundation has always been his marriage to Sophie. Their relationship has evolved into one of the most stable partnerships in modern royal history, serving as a striking contrast to the high-profile marital breakdowns that plagued his older siblings during the late 20th century. As the institution prepares to navigate the structural challenges of the coming years, the strength of this partnership will become an increasingly vital asset for the crown. The story of how they built this relationship provides an illuminating glimpse into Edward's cautious, long-term approach to life. The two first met in 1987 at Capital Radio in London, where Edward was 23 and dating one of Sophie's close friends, and 22-year-old Sophie Rhys-Jones was working in the public relations department. No immediate connection was made at the time, and it was not until 6 years later in 1993 that their paths crossed again. Sophie was hired to manage the publicity for a charitable tennis event that Edward was organizing. Bonding over a shared love of sports, the outdoors, and the arts, they began dating quietly. Their first official date was a private tennis match, followed by an informal dinner at Buckingham Palace, a setting that allowed them to cultivate a connection far away from the prying eyes of the British tabloid press. Having witnessed the intense media intrusion that contributed to the collapse of his brother's marriages, Edward was acutely aware of the dangers that public scrutiny posed to a developing relationship. By the winter of 1993, rumors of their romance began to circulate in the press, prompting Edward to take a highly unusual and defensive step. He released a personal statement directly to newspaper editors, appealing for privacy and explicitly asking them to respect Sophie's personal and professional space. He took the extraordinary step of begging reporters not to destroy the one part of his life that he felt should remain entirely private. This early intervention demonstrated a clear understanding that the media ecosystem could easily overwhelm an individual who had not been raised within the palace walls. The relationship continued to progress under a blanket of deliberate discretion. Sophie began appearing alongside Edward at low-key family events, such as the 1994 wedding of Lord Ivar Mountbatten, where she was photographed sharing a car with Princess Margaret. Impressing Margaret was notoriously difficult for anyone entering the royal circle, yet Sophie managed to navigate the family's complex social dynamics with quiet competence. Despite growing public pressure and frequent media speculation regarding a potential wedding, Edward refused to be rushed into a proposal. When a reporter directly questioned him about his timeline, Edward responded sharply, suggesting that the more people minded their own business, the more likely an engagement would occur. Behind the scenes, historic events like Princess Diana's explosive television interview in 1995 and her tragic passing in 1997 naturally caused the family to proceed with extreme caution regarding any public milestones. Ultimately, after 5 years of careful dating, Edward proposed during a winter holiday in the Bahamas. Reflecting on the deliberate delay in their engagement, Edward later admitted that he could not easily explain the timeline, but he firmly believed it would not have felt right any earlier, noting that Sophie would likely have declined a premature proposal. They were married on June 19, 1999 at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. In stark contrast to the grand, state-funded weddings of his older brothers, Edward and Sophie requested a much smaller, more relaxed ceremony. Only 5 celebratory guests were invited. The service began in the late afternoon to minimize public disruption, and the traditional requirement for female guests to wear formal hats was dropped, though the Queen Mother famously chose to wear one anyway. Even with a public relations background, Sophie faced a steep learning curve upon entering full-time royal life. In the early years of their marriage, both tried to maintain their independent commercial careers, a decision that led to a significant professional hurdle. In 2001, Sophie was targeted by an undercover reporter from the News of the World newspaper in a high-profile media sting. She was recorded making indiscreet remarks about contemporary British politicians and senior members of the royal family, and the conversation implied that her royal connections could benefit her private public relations firm. The subsequent media storm forced a profound re-evaluation of their position. Recognizing the incompatibility of private commerce and public duty, Sophie stepped down from her firm, and Edward simultaneously wound down his television production company. From that pivotal moment onward, they committed themselves entirely to official duties on behalf of the crown. This transition to full-time service was accompanied by profound personal challenges at home. In 2001, Sophie suffered a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy that required emergency medical intervention. 2 years later, in November 2003, their daughter Louise was born prematurely via an emergency cesarean section following a sudden placental abruption. The situation was critical, and because Edward was away on an official royal visit to Mauritius at the time, he missed the birth entirely. Sophie lost a dangerous amount of blood, and the baby required immediate specialist care at a separate hospital. The gravity of the situation was underscored by a rare gesture from Queen Elizabeth, who broke traditional protocol to visit Sophie personally in the hospital during her recovery. When their son James was born in 2007, the couple made a definitive decision that would shape their family's long-term relationship with the monarchy. In accordance with a clear agreement made with the Queen at the time of their wedding, Edward and Sophie chose not to style their children as a prince or a princess, despite being entitled to do so as grandchildren of the monarch. Instead, they were given the lower courtesy titles of Lady Louise Windsor and Viscount Severn, with James later becoming the Earl of Wessex when Edward ascended to his father's title. Sophie later explained to the British press that they raised their children with the clear understanding that they would highly likely have to work for a living in the real world, rather than relying on taxpayer-funded royal roles. This deliberate choice shielded the children from the intense public scrutiny that had complicated the lives of their cousins. As the years progressed, this focus on privacy, duty, and family solidarity transformed Edward and Sophie into one of the most dependable pairs within the royal apparatus. While other members of the family dominated international headlines with personal disclosures, legal battles, and public conflicts, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, as they were known for over 2 decades, quietly went about their work. They took on a vast portfolio of patronages, representing the crown with a consistent, dignified presence that won the deep respect of senior courtiers and the public alike. Their reliability became particularly evident during the final years of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip's lives, as the aging monarchs increasingly relied on Edward and Sophie to manage complex regional engagements and maintain a comforting presence during national transitions. A major milestone arrived on their 25th wedding anniversary, marking a quarter century of an enduring, successful partnership. Earlier that same year, during a public engagement in Leeds, Sophie surprised her husband with a rare, emotional public tribute to mark his milestone birthday. Addressing the gathered audience, she described Edward as the best of fathers, the most loving of husbands, and quite simply her dearest friend. She drew moving comparisons between Edward and his late father, Prince Philip, noting that both were men deeply devoted to duty and family. The heartfelt declaration left Edward visibly emotional, a rare public display of vulnerability from a couple that had spent decades maintaining a strict boundary between their public obligations and private emotions. The strength of this partnership is not merely a comforting personal reality. It is a foundational component of the monarchy's operational strategy as it approaches the critical milestone of 2027. With the senior ranks of the family heavily depleted by illness, age, and permanent retirements, the burden of maintaining the crown's traditional visibility across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth falls disproportionately on this single, coordinated couple. Edward and Sophie have transitioned from being background figures into central pillars of the modern House of Windsor. Their ability to manage an expanding workload without courting personal drama or media conflict is precisely what allows the institution to project an image of stability during a period of profound transition. Ultimately, the record of their marriage demonstrates that surviving the royal machine requires a shared philosophy of service and a mutual commitment to shielding the personal life from public exploitation. Edward's early warnings about the brutality of the spotlight were informed by the challenges he and Sophie faced and overcame together. By refusing to participate in the competitive arena of modern celebrity culture, they successfully built a secure space where their family could thrive. As the structural pressures of the slimmed-down monarchy intensify over the coming years, this rock-solid partnership will serve as the primary defensive line for an institution running out of personnel, proving that quiet dependability remains the most effective strategy for institutional survival. The philanthropic side of Prince Edward's life is where the true substance of his royal career resides, providing the definitive explanation for why his quiet perspective on the future carries such immense weight. While other public figures have sought validation through media visibility or public relations campaigns, Edward has spent decades quietly building a tangible legacy based entirely on steady, unglamorous dedication to service. His charitable work focuses heavily on fields that require long-term investment rather than immediate headlines, specifically youth development, education, physical athletics, and the performing arts. By analyzing the massive scale of this behind-the-scenes contribution, it becomes clear that his insights regarding institutional survival are grounded in a deep, practical understanding of what it takes to keep an ancient institution relevant in a rapidly changing world. The cornerstone of his public legacy is undoubtedly his profound, multi-decade involvement with the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. This global youth achievement program, founded by his father, Prince Philip, in 1956, operates in over 130 countries and is designed to instill resilience, self-reliance, and community spirit in young people through a series of physical and practical challenges. Edward did not simply inherit a leadership role in this organization as a matter of royal privilege after his father's retirement. Instead, his connection to the program was built from the ground up through personal effort and long-term commitment. At the age of 22, shortly after completing his university education at Cambridge, Edward personally completed the demanding requirements to earn the scheme's gold level in 1986, an experience that included a grueling 60-mile trek across the unpredictable terrain of the Scottish Highlands. This personal achievement laid the foundation for a lifelong institutional commitment. Edward became a trustee of the United Kingdom charity in 1988 and took on a leadership role for the International Award Association in 2006, eventually serving as the chair of its International Council for 17 years. By 2015, he had assumed the role of chair of the International Award Foundation, effectively heading the global network of organizations tasked with keeping his father's original vision alive for future generations. When King Charles officially conferred the title of Duke of Edinburgh upon Edward on his 59th birthday in March 2023, it was widely recognized by royal observers as the formal acknowledgement of a transition that had been carefully planned for decades. The appointment was not merely symbolic. It was a reflection of the reality that Edward had already spent the majority of his adult life acting as the primary custodian of this massive global legacy. Edward's work with the youth program has always been highly practical rather than merely ceremonial. To raise funds and awareness for the organization's international expansion, he has frequently undertaken unconventional and physically demanding challenges. In one notable fundraising initiative, he raised over £2 million by playing real tennis on all 50 active real tennis courts scattered across the world, a unique athletic feat that no other individual had ever attempted. Furthermore, his international travels on behalf of the foundation have taken him to countless countries, including Ghana, Israel, Kenya, and Chile, where he has consistently prioritized meeting directly with young participants from diverse and underserved communities. Whether standing alongside national leaders to present certificates or encouraging students in urban environments to push past their personal barriers, Edward has consistently demonstrated that he views public service as an active, hands-on responsibility rather than a series of curated photographic opportunities. Beyond his signature work with the Youth Awards, Edward maintains a vast portfolio of official responsibilities, holding personal patronages with more than 70 distinct charities and organizations. His choices in this area reflect his personal passions and his early background in the creative industries. He serves as a dedicated patron for several of the nation's most prestigious cultural institutions, including the National Youth Theatre of Great Britain, the London Mozart Players, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and the Northern Ballet. He also extends his support to specialized educational organizations such as Chetham's School of Music in Manchester and the Orpheus Center Trust, which provides performing arts opportunities for young adults with physical and learning disabilities. By consistently backing these organizations, Edward has quietly helped preserve the financial and cultural health of the arts sector, ensuring that creative opportunities remain accessible to communities far outside the traditional cultural centers of London. In addition to his cultural contributions, Edward has built a significant legacy within the realm of national and international athletics. He serves as the patron of the British Paralympic Association, a role that aligns closely with his advocacy for inclusion and physical well-being. He also holds presidencies and patronages with various sporting bodies, including GB Snowsport, Badminton Scotland, the Tennis and Rackets Association, and the Sport and Recreation Alliance. His work in this sector extends to the global stage through his long-standing relationship with the Commonwealth Games Federation. Having officially opened the Commonwealth Games in Auckland in 1990 and again in Kuala Lumpur in 1998, he became the vice patron of the Federation in 2006, utilizing the international sporting event as a mechanism to strengthen diplomatic and community ties across diverse member states. The operational reality of Edward's career is defined by a massive, consistent workload that rarely registers in the mainstream media, but forms the literal backbone of the monarchy's domestic presence. For over 2 decades, he has carried out upwards of 200 official engagements annually, a grueling schedule that involves balancing local community visits, military appointments, and international diplomatic tours. His commitment to preserving historic spaces and community structures is evident in his support for numerous cathedral appeals, including projects to renew Newport Minster on the Isle of Wight and the restoration of historical organs at Wells and Norwich cathedrals. Additionally, he has lent his support to the Wren Project, an ambitious scheme aimed at restoring the historic Sir Christopher Wren Church of St. James's in London, demonstrating a deep respect for national heritage and architectural conservation. This extensive record of quiet service has not been completely without moments of public debate or institutional tension. In 2011, an official visit to Bahrain by Edward and Sophie drew sharp criticism from human rights advocacy groups after the couple accepted a gift of jewelry from the nation's ruling family during a period of civil unrest. While the incident created uncomfortable headlines, it remained a rare exception in a career that has otherwise been defined by a meticulous avoidance of political controversy or personal scandal. Compared to the turbulent public lives of other senior royals, Edward has mastered the art of keeping the focus entirely on the organizations he represents, demonstrating a clear understanding that the true value of a working royal lies in their utility to the public rather than their personal celebrity status. In recent years, as the older generation of the family has naturally receded from public life, Edward has quietly stepped forward to assume several of his late father's most significant traditional roles. He has taken over as the president of the prestigious Royal Windsor Horse Show and became the patron of London Youth, a community group that Prince Philip had actively supported for more than 70 years. Furthermore, he has served twice as the Lord High Commissioner to the Church of Scotland, acting as the personal representative of the sovereign to the General Assembly, a role that carries deep historical and religious resonance north of the border. These escalating responsibilities, combined with regional titles such as the Earl of Forfar, which came with a custom-designed tartan in his honor, illustrate how his institutional weight has steadily increased as the monarchy undergoes a profound generational transition. When you synthesize all of these elements, the decades of uninterrupted service, the stable and private marriage, the dedication to practical youth development, and the total avoidance of public relations battles, the true meaning of Edward's perspective on the upcoming milestone of 2027 becomes perfectly clear. He is not someone who speaks out of a desire for media attention, nor is he someone who drops cryptic remarks to generate public speculation. He is an individual who has spent his entire adult life inside the belly of the royal machine, observing its internal dynamics, testing its boundaries, and understanding its profound limitations. When a person with that specific background highlights the brutality of the public spotlight and notes that the institution cannot easily bend to personal desires, it is a cold, realistic assessment of the future. The ultimate takeaway from Edward's long journey from an idealistic young producer to the Duke of Edinburgh is that the survival of the crown depends entirely on quiet, consistent execution. The glamorous, expansive era of the 20th century monarchy, which relied on a massive network of working royals to cover thousands of national events, has reached its natural end. The streamlined institution that remains as we approach 2027 is running on a critical shortage of personnel, and the burden of keeping the throne relevant to the public falls squarely on the shoulders of a very few dedicated individuals. Edward's life of quiet service proves that he understands this reality better than anyone else. The warning implicit in his career is that the true danger facing the monarchy is not a sudden, explosive crisis, but rather the slow, quiet exhaustion of a system that is simply running out of leaders to carry the historical weight of the crown.